But the tragedy did not end there. Eve handed the forbidden fruit to Adam, who had been standing nearby and witnessed everything. She recounted the serpent's words, her eyes filled with anticipation. Adam, deeply loving Eve, did not stop her. He looked into her eyes, then at the forbidden fruit, and finally took a bite. In that instant, everything changed. Their eyes were opened, but not to wisdom or glorious enlightenment as the serpent had promised. Instead, they became aware of their nakedness. Not just a physical exposure, but a revelation of guilt and shame. A strange and overwhelming sensation gripped their minds: fear, insecurity, and the loss of the innocence they once held. They hurriedly sought to cover themselves with fig leaves. These leaves, once merely a part of the garden's natural beauty, now became symbols of shame and guilt. Every step they took in the garden felt heavy, as if Eden, once a flawless paradise, was now mirroring the turmoil in their souls. The atmosphere of the garden shifted. The streams still flowed, but their sounds were no longer soothing. The birds stopped singing, and the vibrant garden seemed to fall into a suffocating silence. Adam and Eve had not only broken a command, they had severed the sacred bond with the Creator, disrupting the perfect harmony of paradise. As darkness enveloped their hearts, Adam and Eve felt the weight of their choice. They knew that what had been done could not be undone, and that the price they would pay would far exceed anything they had imagined. It was a moment of destiny when innocence was lost, and the greatest tragedy in human history began. The air in the Garden of Eden grew heavy, no longer carrying the tranquility it once held. After eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve no longer felt the freedom and joy they had known before. Instead, a foreign sensation took hold of their minds: fear, shame, and a painful awareness of themselves. They quickly plucked fig leaves, stitching them together to cover their nakedness. The leaves, once a simple and perfect part of nature, now served as awkward coverings, symbols of lost innocence and trust. As evening fell, the soft golden light of the setting sun bathed the garden. But instead of bringing its usual peace, the light seemed to amplify their unease. When the sound of God's footsteps echoed through the garden, signaling His presence, Adam and Eve panicked. They fled, hiding among the dense foliage, hoping the shadows of the garden would conceal them from the penetrating gaze of the Creator. God's voice echoed, not as a thunderous roar of anger, but as a solemn and sorrowful inquiry. "Where are you?" This question was not merely about locating them. It was the call of a Creator reaching out to His children, as if asking, "When did you stray from me?" After a moment of silence, Adam emerged from his hiding place. His eyes were cast downward, his shoulders weighed heavy with guilt. "I heard your voice in the garden," Adam said, his voice trembling, "and I was afraid, because I was naked, so I hid myself." God's response came with both authority and profound sadness. "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" Instead of owning up to his actions, Adam glanced toward Eve. His voice faltered, seeking to shift the blame. "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." Adam's words hung heavy in the air. In his reply, he not only blamed Eve, but subtly insinuated that God bore responsibility for creating her. The first rift appeared in their once perfect relationship, a division born of sin. God turned to Eve. His gaze, filled not with wrath but with deep disappointment and sorrow, met hers. "What is this you have done?" he asked. Eve lowered her head, her voice quivering. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Her words admitted guilt, but like Adam, she shifted responsibility, this time to the serpent. Both had chosen to evade accountability by pointing fingers elsewhere. Finally, God's eyes fell upon the serpent, the cunning creature now silent in the shadows. It offered no words, but its presence radiated defiance and malice. For the first time in human history, blame and division arose. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, and Adam even subtly reproached the Creator. The sacred harmony between humanity and God, as well as between Adam and Eve, was shattered. The atmosphere of the garden was irrevocably changed. The streams still flowed, but their babbling no longer brought peace. The birds, once singing joyfully, had fallen silent, as if mourning the loss. Eden, once a paradise, now bore witness to humanity's first tragedy. God, in His righteousness, could not overlook this act. he prepared to deliver his judgment. Yet even in judgment, he remained full of love and mercy. Darkness had descended, but a glimmer of redemption was planted, a promise that one day this sacred bond could be restored. As darkness began to envelop the Garden of Eden, the air grew cold, as though all of nature mourned humanity's first fall. Adam and Eve, their heads bowed in shame, stood before the Creator with heavy hearts. They knew that what was to come would not only alter their fate, but that of all humanity. With absolute justice, God began to pronounce his judgment. He turned first to the serpent, the one who had sown the seed of sin through its cunning. With a voice of supreme authority, God declared, "Because you have done this, you are cursed more than all livestock and more than any wild animal. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This curse was not merely a punishment upon the serpent, but also a profound prophecy. The offspring of the woman foreshadowed the coming of a Savior, who would crush the power of sin and restore the relationship between humanity and the Creator. This was the first glimmer of hope planted amidst the darkness of sin, a promise that darkness would not reign forever. Next, God turned to Eve, the first woman and the first to succumb to the serpent's temptation. His gaze carried not only sorrow but also compassion as he said, "I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." These words carried both judgment and profound meaning. The pain of childbirth was the price of the fall, yet it also became a symbol of hope. Through this pain, new life would continue to emerge, bringing with it the chance to mend what had been broken. Finally, God's gaze turned to Adam. The first man, formed from the dust with the breath of life, now faced the consequences of his choice. "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." These words sounded like a death knell for the ease of life Adam once knew. From this point on, he would toil endlessly to sustain himself. The ground, once a source of abundant provision, would now resist him, challenging his survival. Yet, even in this punishment, there was a redemptive purpose. Labor would teach Adam the value of effort and instill in him a sense of responsibility for the world God had created. As the judgment was declared, Adam and Eve bowed their heads, realizing they had lost paradise. But in that dark moment, an unexpected light of hope emerged. In his boundless mercy, God did not leave them to face the world in shame and nakedness. He made garments of animal skins to clothe them, an act both practical and deeply symbolic. The garments of skin were more than just physical coverings. They represented God's compassion. Yet to create these garments, an innocent creature had to be sacrificed. This was the first glimpse of atonement through sacrifice, foreshadowing the coming Savior, who would give his life to free humanity from the power of sin. Then, God sent Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. They walked away, their eyes filled with regret, looking back at the place that had been their home. Behind them, a flaming sword and cherubim were set to guard the entrance, preventing them from returning and accessing the tree of life. As the gates of paradise closed, Adam and Eve stepped into a new world, a world no longer perfect, but still carrying God's promise. They bore a great responsibility to sow the seeds of life, build a new future, and hold on to the hope that one day the promise of redemption would be fulfilled, restoring harmony between humanity and the Creator. Standing at the edge of the garden, Adam and Eve looked back one last time. A soft light filtered through the trees, illuminating streams that once babbled through vibrant fields of flowers. Now this paradise was guarded by majestic cherubim, their golden wings glistening as they stood resolutely. They held flaming swords that spun in every direction, emitting a blinding light, forming an impenetrable barrier that protected Eden from those who had lost their innocence. Adam clasped Eve's trembling hand tightly, feeling the quiver in her grasp. They exchanged no words, but their eyes, heavy with sorrow, conveyed a silent message to etch the image of Eden deep into their hearts. They knew that the path ahead would hold no endless meadows, no refreshing streams, and no more serene evenings spent conversing with the Creator. Instead, they would step into a world where the ground would resist them, where harvests would demand sweat and tears, and where pain would become an unavoidable part of life. The first steps away from Eden felt heavier than the largest boulder. The soil beneath their feet, once soft and inviting, now seemed dry and rugged, forewarning of the harsh reality awaiting them. The wind carried the rustling of leaves, but instead of the gentle melody they once knew, it sounded like the garden's sighs, lamenting the departure of its first inhabitants. Adam, the first man, felt the weight of his responsibility more than ever. He knew that from now on, he would toil tirelessly to sustain himself and his future family. The hands that once freely named all living creatures in Eden would now wield tools to till the earth, battling the thorns and thistles that sprang from the cursed ground. Yet within him was a determination, a steadfast resolve that he and Eve, though cast out of paradise, would build a new life. He held on to the hope that their children would continue toward the redemption promised by God. Eve, the first woman, bore the deep sorrow of leaving the garden she once believed to be an eternal home. Yet in her heart, she held on to an unshakable faith. Though she would endure the pain of childbirth, she believed that each child she bore would bring them closer to the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption. The vision of children carrying the spark of new life and running freely in the vast world became her motivation to move forward on the arduous path ahead. As they walked away, the light of Eden slowly faded behind them, but the memory of paradise remained alive within them. They recalled the days of joy, when nature and humanity existed in perfect harmony. They remembered the warm voice of the Creator, His gentle teachings, and the irreplaceable peace that had once been theirs. Yet they understood that those moments now belonged to a chapter of their lives that had closed. Their task was to write the next chapter, even though its first page was written in pain. Despite their expulsion, Adam and Eve were not entirely consumed by despair. God's promise that the offspring of Eve would crush the serpent's head became a faint light in their darkness. This promise served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that God had not abandoned them, and that one day, the bond between humanity and the Creator would be restored. They did not know when that day would come, but their faith in God's love and mercy gave them the strength to press on. As night fell, Adam and Eve sat together under a star-filled sky. The twinkling stars seemed like watchful eyes gazing upon them, a reminder that God was still present, still caring, and still watching over their journey. In their eyes, alongside the pain of loss, there was a glimmer of hope, that even though they had left paradise, they could build a new life. Their children would carry on, and the promise of redemption would one day be fulfilled. Thus began humanity's journey, not just of survival, but of hope, forgiveness, and the longing to return to the Creator's embrace. When the gates of Eden closed, Adam and Eve embarked on a new path in an unfamiliar and unforgiving world, no longer sheltered by paradise. The gentle light of Eden was now but a memory. The ground beneath their feet, once soft and inviting, had turned rough, barren, and unyielding. The fields no longer bore abundant fruit but were choked with thorns and weeds, demanding relentless toil for meager yields. Adam, with calloused hands, worked the soil daily, each bead of sweat a reminder of the sin that had driven humanity from paradise. Every strike of the plow became not just an act of labor, but a reflection of the brokenness that had entered the world. Eve, too, bore the burdens of their new life. As she carried their first child, the pain in her body reminded her of God's judgment. Yet, through it all, she experienced profound joy when she gave birth to their first son, Cain. Cain was the first light in this new world, proof that life could continue despite loss and suffering. Not long after, their second son, Abel, was born. Watching their children grow brought Adam and Eve a measure of comfort, a reassurance that even without Eden, they could create a family and sow the seeds for future generations. However, the world beyond Eden was not merely a place of labor and childbirth. It was where the consequences of sin became increasingly apparent. Cain and Abel, their two sons, grew into men with differing paths. Cain became a farmer, tending the soil, while Abel became a shepherd, living among his flocks. Despite their different callings, both brought offerings to God as a gesture of gratitude. Cain offered the fruits of his harvest, while Abel presented the finest firstborn lambs from his flock. Yet, when God accepted Abel's offering but rejected Cain's, jealousy and anger took root in Cain's heart, leading to an unimaginable tragedy. Overcome with uncontrollable rage, Cain killed his brother Abel, the first death in human history. This act symbolized the broken relationships between people, a devastating consequence of humanity's fall from grace. When Adam and Eve learned of this, their grief was indescribable. Losing Abel, their kind, loving son, and seeing Cain, their firstborn, become a murderer was a wound that pierced their hearts deeply. They realized that sin had not only separated them from God, but had also spread through their lineage, creating fractures among their loved ones. In the days that followed, Adam and Eve lived in a heavy silence, grappling with the pain and searching for meaning and hope amid their loss. Yet, even in the darkness of this tragedy, a new light emerged. Eve conceived again and gave birth to another son, naming him Seth. As she held the child, she said, "God has granted me another son in place of Abel, whom Cain killed." Seth was more than a source of comfort for Adam and Eve. He held a deeper significance. From Seth, a new lineage began, a lineage that would lead to the promised Savior, the one who would crush the serpent's head and restore the lost bond between humanity and the Creator. Life after Eden was a series of long days filled with labor, suffering, and loss. But it was also a journey of hope and the restoration of faith. Though they endured division within their family and the loss of paradise, Adam and Eve never lost faith in God's promise. They understood that even though they had left the light of Eden, God still watched over them, still cared for them, and still guided them through their arduous journey. Each night, under the light of the moon, Adam and Eve would sit together, gazing at the stars that sparkled like the watchful eyes of heaven. They shared stories with Seth about Eden, a perfect world they once lived in, and about the great promise that one day, their lineage would bring redemption to humanity. Through their tears and hardships, Adam and Eve taught their children to believe that even in a world filled with challenges, God's love and mercy remained, guiding them through every trial. Time passed, and Adam and Eve, the first humans on Earth, faced the inevitable truth of life, death. Life after Eden had been a relentless cycle of toil, simple joys, and profound sorrow. They built a family, watched their children grow, and witnessed the far-reaching consequences of the first sin echo through generations. Yet no amount of resilience could spare them from the judgment God had pronounced in Eden. "You will return to the ground, for from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." According to tradition, Eve, the mother of all living, was the first to pass away. When she died, Adam sat silently by her side, his hands, which had cradled their children, now trembling as he caressed the face of the companion who had journeyed with him through both glory and hardship. Eve, who had shared the joys of Eden and endured the pain of losing it, now rested peacefully as though she were merely asleep. Adam leaned in to whisper a final farewell, knowing that death was not the end, but a part of a greater plan. Eve's passing left an irreplaceable void. Adam continued on, bearing the responsibility of caring for their family alone. He taught them how to till the soil, live in reverence for God, and hold steadfastly to the hope of redemption. In his long, lonely nights, Adam often gazed up at the starlit sky, where the lights seemed to whisper of the Creator's presence. He recalled the voice of God in Eden, the first moments when he and Eve were given the breath of life, and he prayed that one day their descendants would restore humanity's harmony with God. When Adam's own time came, he faced death with a profound sense of acceptance. He knew this moment had been destined ever since he and Eve had chosen to eat the forbidden fruit. Yet instead of fear, Adam embraced death with unwavering faith. He lay down beside Eve, where she had been resting, his eyes closing in peace. Adam knew that his life, though marked by suffering and loss, carried immense meaning. He had lived not just as a man, but as the patriarch of all humanity, planting the seeds of a lineage that would lead to the Savior's arrival. The deaths of Adam and Eve were not merely personal events, but profound symbols. They reminded future generations that sin carries heavy consequences, not just the loss of paradise, but the finite nature of life itself. Yet, their deaths were also a testament to hope. Through them, humanity's lineage continued, paving the way for those who would become part of God's plan for redemption. The legacy of Adam and Eve was not just the children and grandchildren they nurtured, but the enduring lessons they left behind. Life is a series of challenges and mistakes, but hope and faith will always guide humanity through the darkness. Through the stories of Eden, the fall, and their pain, their descendants learned that even when distanced from God's light, His love and mercy would always remain present. Light amidst the darkness of tragedy. The story of Adam and Eve begins as a beautiful epic of creation and life, yet it swiftly transforms into a profound tragedy of fall and loss. However, even in the shadows of this tragedy, light flickers, illuminating a new journey for humanity, a journey in search of meaning, peace, and redemption. When Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, they left not just a physical paradise, but stepped into a world of challenges, where they faced the consequences of sin and the responsibility of building a future. Every strike of Adam's plow upon the earth, every pang of pain Eve endured during childbirth, carried not just sorrow, but also hope. Hope that these trials were part of a greater plan, the Creator's design for the redemption of humanity. From their first steps on barren soil, humanity began to write its continuing story. The lineage of Adam and Eve spanned generations, marked by failures and missteps, yet also moments of hope and redemption. Seth, their third son, became a new beacon of light, a lineage through which the promised Savior would come. Each generation after Seth bore the hope that one day, the lost connection between humanity and God would be restored. The story of Adam and Eve is not merely a lesson on the consequences of poor choices, but a symbol of resilience and the ability to find light in the darkness. In moments of deepest despair, hope rises strongest. Life continues through the generations, and each generation carries the responsibility to build a better world, moving closer to the promise of redemption. This journey is not just theirs, it is ours. We, their descendants, are invited to partake in this grand narrative, contributing to a world that reflects the love, mercy, and justice of the Creator. Looking back on the story of Adam and Eve, the question isn't just what happened, but also what will we do from here? In our lives, full of challenges and choices, what can we learn from their mistakes? How can we shape our lives to become part of the journey toward redemption? This journey of light amidst darkness continues. So how will you choose to live? Will you build a life that brings light, hope, and love into the world, or let it fade into the shadows of indifference and despair? Let the story of Adam and Eve serve as a powerful reminder that no matter how often we fall, we always have the chance to rise, to walk forward on the path toward the light and harmony promised by God.